Hello everybody, welcome back to Wandering into Wellness.
How's it going?
Today we are here with special guest Maria O'Sullivan, who is a lactation consultant, a mum of 3 little ones and 1 big one, actually, not so little, 2 little ones and 1 bigger one, and also an extended breastfeeder. And we have her here on the podcast today to share her experiences of extended breastfeeding and why she made those choices and how it feels to do those things. So welcome, Maria. Nice to see you. So I'm really excited to have you here because we've been doing this series now on pregnancy and birth and beyond, and we've been talking to lots of different women now and lots of different experts in this time in a woman's life especially. And breastfeeding was something that I really wanted to talk about because it's been an area that I kind of studied for a while before I had my little boy, and I really had planned to extended breastfeed. It was the thing that I really was sure in my head, like that's the way it's going to go for me, and I really believed in the benefits of it, and I had read so much about it. And then we had a really tough breastfeeding journey, and I really did everything that I could to try and continue to breastfeed, but unfortunately for us, we got to 6 months and then he refused to feed after then. And so we had tongue tie, we had latch issues, we had tongue asymmetry, and we went to every different possible version of people. But also there was, whilst my partner was really supportive of the breastfeeding, there were a lot of people around us that were dissident voices, let's say, who when stuff was going tricky, when he started to lose weight, were going, give him the bottle, give him the bottle. And I found myself in this really vulnerable situation where I was really sure that I wanted to continue, and there just wasn't another option in my head, but there just wasn't enough people there who were actually present on the ground showing me what to do on a day-to-day basis. And it's really one of the hardest things I think I've been through in my life, was giving up breastfeeding, because it was like part of the identity of who I wanted to be as a mom. And so I'm really interested to have this conversation with someone who has managed to do it and has made those choices, because anytime that I talked about it with people, I was often met with resistance, or people saying, well, why would you want to do that? Or that's a bit strange, or why would you breastfeed? Sure, you got to 6 months, that's great, you know? And so when I was disappointed and I felt hurt by the feeling that I wasn't able to do that, I felt like a lot of people around me didn't understand why that would have been, because they saw it as like, brilliant, you got to 6 months, sure, that's what you would do, right? So I'm really interested to know, like, you have 3 kids. Did you always know you wanted to extended breastfeed? Was that something you were always planning to do, or was that something that just kind of naturally occurred as you went through your parenting journey?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that you only got your 6 months, especially when you had a longer goal in terms of what you were thinking for yourself, like, and that you didn't get the support that you needed at the time.
Thank you.
That's really hard. So did I always intend to extend the breastfeed? Yeah, I guess I didn't know the term extended breastfeeding at the time, though. I grew up in a family where there was lots of babies and nieces and nephews and children, lots of children. So I was always very kind of comfortable around babies, but I'd never seen anybody breastfeed. I think the first time I heard about breastfeeding was a royal connection, Princess Diana breastfeeding her kids. I was really into Princess Diana when I was a little girl. And then, yeah, I know, yeah. And then I think later on, I think there was a scene in The Snapper where Sharon breastfeeds her baby. I think that was another scene. And then I started working in a play school in Cork City called Wallaroo Play School. And all the mums in the play school were breastfeeding. They were having their babies at home. And I was 19, and I just got landed into this culture bubble, really. And it just looked really natural, I suppose, and it just seemed really easy, and the kids were really happy. I could see the kids were really happy, and they had lovely connections. And like in the play school, and it's probably wouldn't be the same these days now, but the mums were breastfed. And I always remember one mum, she was pregnant and she was still breastfeeding her little girl at the time. And then when the baby was born, she came back into the play school, and her little girl was having difficulty letting her go, and mum was completely fine with it. And where I worked, they were completely fine with her staying with her child as well. So she was with her little girl and she was breastfeeding a newborn. And the toddler was also feeding, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And so then when I got pregnant myself, there was kind of no doubt in my mind that what I was going to do. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to breastfeed and I'm going to have my babies at home. So those were very kind of concrete decisions that I made very earlier on. And I also had read a book called The Continuum Concept by Jean Leadenhoff, and it just kind of blew my mind away. Like reading about she went and lived in South America for like 2 years, I think it was, and was a tribe of people, and they were just really into obviously very primal, you know, they really followed their gut and they carried their babies all the time. And it was the carrying and the idea of the continuum after birth, then breastfeeding came next. Placenta came out, then breastfeeding came next. It was kind of like the placenta came out and then the breastfeeding replaced the placenta, and that place where your baby grew and you nurtured your baby and you held them. So I had all those ideas in my head as well, like yeah, so you know, I guess it was there from the start. Like it was a very kind of clear decision for me to make.
Did you have what age were you when you had your first child?
27.
And did you have support around you in terms of family members or your partner or anything like that? Were people also really pro breastfeeding, or was it just you kind of holding strong in this belief that you had?
So those mums that were in the preschool, they kind of became like my first tribe, if you would call it. I would have hung out with them. I became friends with them before I became a mum myself. And then some of them were pregnant at the same time as I was pregnant, so we were kind of going through the pregnancies together as well. Like, and so I had their support, and I found an amazing home birth midwife, and I had her support. I wasn't with my partner when my first daughter was born. So I was kind of pretty much a single mum from the start. But that didn't even kind of come into the equation. I didn't think, oh, because I'm a single mum, I won't be able to do this. I just thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I think having the home birth really helped me as well, though, because that continuum wasn't broken. And I suppose that idea of the continuum was so strong in my head. That the home birth just kind of really fed into it, and just being in my own space, and midwives were amazing, and they really supported me and how I wanted to birth, and it was a long birth. And it wasn't easy, like it wasn't an easy, but I say it wasn't an easy birth. It wasn't an easy birth as in it was long and she was overdue, and you know, I could have ended up in hospital, but I didn't. And yeah, I don't know, even like that first night after she was born, like it wasn't like the perfect start. It wasn't like she did the breast crawl. Because what happened after she was born was I had a postpartum hemorrhage, but it was a very small one, so I didn't need to be transferred or anything. But so she didn't feed straight away, but it didn't. They weren't concerned, and I wasn't concerned, and they left, and I was left with my baby. And then when she did want to feed, we just started feeding. And like, I mean, I had sore nipples and all that at the start, like everybody else. And that kind of passed. And yeah, it just kind of made sense. It was just
and did you have a notion, sorry to interrupt, did you have a notion at the start when you were breastfeeding her, like maybe a target in your mind of how long, from what you'd read, from what you understood, of how long you would like to be breastfeeding her? Or were you kind of just like, I'm just going to do this until it stops? Or like, what was in your mind at the start?
I'm just going to do it till it stops. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with the flow. It kind of fed into all my kind of ideas around parenting. Breastfeeding was parenting to me because it met my baby's needs. It meant I was following her cues, so I was learning how to be a mom with her cueing me, because by her, it was kind of like, you know, like a response. It was a responsive thing. So when she'd cue me, I'd respond. Then she was learning to trust me There was, you know, I didn't get stressed because she wasn't crying. I carried her all the time, which a lot of people thought. I was a bit crazy, like some of my family, like they thought that child will never walk.
And tell us about that. Did it, like, when you did put her down or whatever, what, like, how did that transition go? Was that difficult for you or for her, or how did you decide to allow that to evolve, or was it just very natural? And if so, how did it become apparent?
I suppose I saw carrying her for the first 6 months until she could kind of, I think I remember reading about it. I think it was like a Bali ceremony where they have like these grounding ceremonies for babies. So once the baby gets to like about 6 months and they can start to kind of crawl off your lap, or they're looking for more floor time, then they do it naturally. But it's on their terms.
Mm.
And I just think I felt that in arms phase is so important for babies. Like I see parents struggle with it all the time. You know, they read so much into, when they put their babies down, the baby starts to cry. They think, is the baby hungry? Is the baby wet? Oh, is my milk supply low? What am I doing wrong? You know, there's all these thoughts going on. And then I always say to parents, but what happens if you just let the baby sleep in your arms? Do they still wake up? Are they doing the same behaviors as when you put them down? And they say, no, they'll sleep in my arms and it'll be fine now. So I that in arms phase is so important to babies. I don't think it's talked about enough in Western society, because you know there's all these other things that we get to put our babies into, and when all they really need is our arms, that's where they can grow.
So speak to us about, like, is there a sense of sacrifice in that? Because I think most, I could be really wrong, I'm not a parent, but my instinct is that most parents have, you know, a buggy, a sling, a bouncer, you know, those sorts of things, because there is a sense that they have their own lives, or they have other things to do and they need their hands. Like, was there a sense of sacrifice? Was there things that you had to say, okay, I'm not going to do this because I'm going to have my baby? Like, how did that feel?
I think the word that came to me was surrender.
Mm.
That was the word that came to me. You know, I'm just going to surrender to this because it's so much easier when I surrender. You know, I didn't have that kind of pull and push between us. We just kind of exist as one, but it didn't stop me. That's the thing. I think that's again kind of culture and society, and this idea that, you know, if you're carrying your baby all the time, or if you're responding to your baby all the time, that you won't have any life yourself. But I didn't feel like that. I went out, I met friends, I used to go to concerts in the evening, I went to music festivals, I just brought her on the journey with me. And that's where you'd see in a lot of tribal societies as well, like you just kind of get on with it. Well, maybe I just have this kind of tribal mind, I don't know. But it just made sense not to have this separation. And but then we did separate, like, but she was ready for it and I was ready for it, and she toddled off to the play school that I used to work in. And she's very independent now. She's 18.
It resonates in so many ways what you're saying, this idea of the separation, like in the same way as in Western society, we've sort of developed this culture of work where we earn this money to help us to go on holidays, to run away from the life, from the things that we've creating with the work we do. And like the way we've diverged, like foods and medicines, we put them in separate categories, all these kind of separation things. I love what you're saying about that integration, that kind of wholeness around it. It just sounds very like honest and very like nice and intuitive.
Yeah. I suppose like I was really lucky as well, though. I had the idea of the village in my head. So even though I was a single mom, I was 27. As I said, I had a lot of mom friends and family friends. But I learned to ask for help. I put things in place. Like before she was born, like I did a mother blessing for myself, where I gathered all my friends and said, this is what I need. I need food. I need practical things. And again, I think, you know, it's that whole idea of Western society as well, is, you know, when people come around to help you, they're, I'll hold the baby while you while you do the practical things, you make me the cup of tea, or you can do your washing, or whatever you need to do. Again, it's kind of creating that separation instead of actually really helping the family to grow in those first kind of 3 months by really supporting them. Our society kind of, kind of creates barriers in a way, like.
Yeah, I think it's really the pressure. And I think whilst I think that more and more people are speaking out about it, and there are more great sites online and people's pages on Instagram, this kind of stuff, where great mums are talking out about, like, this is the realities of it, and these are the things I'm struggling with, and here are different ways you can do it. I think there's lots and lots of that now, but I do think that I'm not sure that the pressure on mums is getting easier. I think that separation thing is actually just getting worse and worse. Like, there really is that feeling of a pressure of, like, I remember when Reuben was really little, like the first 2 weeks or something, and I just didn't leave the house and I just stayed in bed. And I remember the second Sunday, so 2 weeks in, we went downstairs, and that was like a big deal. Like, we went downstairs and had a meal, and then we went back up to bed again. And then I remember the first time we went out, and we went into a park and meeting some other mums who had babies, and their babies were in the buggies, and I had him in the sling. Because he wouldn't have gone in a buggy, never went in a buggy, never went down. It was just like sling was the only way for him if we were walking. And I remember me saying to them, oh, like, how old are your babies? And they were like 3 days old, and like, just off we are. And they were there like fully dressed with their 3 days old baby, like, and there was this sense of like, not just we're so proud of ourselves, which obviously is like, if they felt great and that's what they wanted to do, great, but there was that sense of like, we got up and out and got dressed at 3 days, and there was that feeling of society kind of going like, we should, like, wow, did you see that mum? She's so natural. She had her hair done and she was going out and doing the stuff at like 1, 2, and 3 weeks, and she did such a good job of that. And for me, listening to it, it was like, it's so hard then to hold your own in your own space of going, well, actually what feels normal for me is to do less and to stay still and to not get dressed, because you start to then go, geez, am I failing now? Because like, I haven't washed my hair in ages and I'm just like lying around in bed. And I think then the partners often can get a misconception, because what they're seeing in television and on the news and all these things is women who are doing it all and having it all. And then if their partner's just going, well, actually, I want to lie in bed for 40 days and do this rest and do this 4th trimester thing, that they're kind of somehow being lazy or being less than. And I think that that's this disparity, isn't it? Because we see from all the tribal cultures that there's this natural resting period, this 40-day period that's honored in so many societies around the world. But in our culture, and even worse in America, there just isn't an allowance for that. It's just all the honor, all the kind of accolades are like how quickly you can get back to your pre-baby body and your pre-baby routine and the way that it was before, and get back to the normal, like all these things that we're hearing now, like a lot anyway in the media. It's the same things are put on mums. And I don't know how do we begin to change that? How do we begin to give the permission of the understanding that the other way is there and it's possible?
Yeah, I think it's really about modeling, because I think for me that's what I saw. And like, I mean, when Freya was 10 weeks old, I discovered literally, I'd heard about them while I was pregnant, but I hadn't gone. And then I found another tribe, but a lot of the mums that I was friends with were going to La Leche League as well. And there I felt like, you do have permission to just be yourself, and follow your instincts, and people will, validate those choices you're making. Yeah, I don't know, like, I mean, 3 days, that horrifies me, because I remember my midwife wouldn't even let me go down the road to collect Freya when Aurora was like 5 days old. I remember saying to her, I think I might go to the school today and collect it. She was, no, you were not going anywhere. You already had a baby 5 days ago. And so I think, like, I suppose home birth really honors that as well. Like when you see those midwives at work, they really honor that. They really honor, and they help the partners to understand as well that women need to rest after giving birth. I suppose because there are so many different transitions with going into hospital. You leave your house as a couple, and then you go into the hospital and you leave with a baby. So there's like the transition of going into the hospital, journey to becoming a family, and then leaving together as a family, and then going back into your home. So there's, you know, there's kind of a lot of kind of breaks in that continuum as well, like, you know, and whatever then happens within the hospital as well, like, I mean, that really kind of can set you up, really can set you up. I mean, people talk about breastfeeding all the time and breastfeeding rates, but until we get the hospital part right, we can't fix the breastfeeding rates, because a lot of stuff happens in that first 3 days, you know, after the birth. And if the mum has been traumatized due to the birth, and if that's not validated and it's not heard, if she's not strong enough to say, when somebody says, you know, do you want us to take the baby away and so you can get some sleep, then they think that's normal, and they think, oh, well, I should do that. Well, if the nurse or the midwife is saying that, then I should do that. And then they'll say, do you want us to give the baby some formula so you can sleep? And then that's added in as well. So then, you know, you're in this kind of cascade of more intervention and more kind of the break of that continuum again then.
But what feels like support in the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Which is problematic, because it's a really, really, really good disguise, unfortunately.
Yes. And like, I know hospitals are not set up like, you know, home births, but I just feel like that's like a big part of the puzzle that really affects the start of the breastfeeding journey.
I think it's huge. I think it's really huge, because I had a home birth, but at when his head was already like out, I had to transfer to the hospital.
Wow.
It was a funny time when I was having the home birth, because the private midwives were being there was a little bit of an attack on the home birth midwives, and so everyone was slightly nervous about stuff that was going on. And so his heart rate dropped at the very last minute, and it had been very, very steady, and my pushing phase was very long. And so we transferred just to be sure. And actually it turned out it was fine. He was born like within seconds being in the hospital. But then suddenly I was in the hospital, and I, again, was totally unprepared for that, because I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to the hospital. That's not in my plan at all. And I remember, just even though I knew that I was going to breastfeed, that was how it was, and I felt comfortable to do that, I hadn't thought of any of the other things. When I was there and my partner had to go home and had to leave, and suddenly I was in this room on my own in the hospital where I hadn't planned to be, and I had none of my stuff, because I didn't even bring a nappy or clothes for the baby, like we just transferred. I was just lying there, and then I needed to go to the loo, and I was like, well, what do I do? Like, where do I put the bit? I've got to walk all the way down this corridor to some loo that I don't know where it is, and I have this baby, and what do I do with him when I get there? Like, where do I put him down? Do I wipe my bottom? I just couldn't figure it out. And then I kind of staggered out into the hallway, and there were all these bassinets outside people's rooms with their babies just in the hallway. And I was like, what? And a nurse came up and said, oh, do you want me to take your baby? We'll just put them in the bassinet in the hallway, and then they can just sleep there while you go in and get some sleep. And, you know, you're in that moment, you've just given birth. It might have taken, mine wasn't super long, it was like 9 hours, but you're exhausted and you're alone. And like, if you weren't really secure in the decisions that you were making, if you hadn't really spent a lot of time researching them, you would have been like, gosh, that sounds really nice. Like, please take my baby so I can go to the loo and then go back in, and all you want to do is sleep. You're just like, please, I want to sleep. Yes, thank you so much. And so if you're met with that in that moment, and I knew that I could feel that feeling. And then the same thing if you're then struggling with breastfeeding, and they're like, sure, here's a bottle. And if you're alone and you're there and your nipples are sore and you're tired and you're just thinking, yeah, anything, just like anything to give me that space. And so if that was instead met with, here, how can I help you to breastfeed? Let me set you up in a really cozy position. Let me bring you a drink. Let me bring you a tea, you know, all these, let me show you how it can be done. You take that option, but you're just taking whatever the option is that's given to you in that minute. And that's the thing about the support. And I think in the same way that we know that kids, the first 6 or 7 years of their life, imprint their behaviors the rest of their lives, I think those first few days are so crucial in how you imprint your abilities to mother, like your feelings of confidence in yourself and your trust. And I think, you know, I had this home birth. I still, in my head, I feel like I had a home birth, because like I birthed him all the way till his head was out at home. So in my head, I still had that, but I could feel that my confidence was undermined like a tiny bit, because I'd had to transfer. You know, there was that feeling of like, well, did I quite do it myself? Like maybe I needed a bit of help. And I think if you were there and you had an episiotomy and forceps, or you had to have an emergency section, and you had that feeling of you needed someone to help you to birth your baby, you're already setting up yourselves in this way of like, I need a sit, like I can't really trust my body, I can't really trust myself. And that's when you really need like triple support of people going, you can do this, rather than here's the other way, you know?
Yeah, and I think as you know, as mothers, as women, we forget that we've carried these babies for 9 months. I mean, literally, we've carried these babies, we've been minding them every single day, you know, since gestation, and then it's kind of like, oh, it's that separation. We're really not sure how to deal with it, or you know, we forget how much we've been doing, and how we've been keeping them safe, and we've already been nurturing them. And then that separation comes in, and then the you know, the kind of the undermining happens, and then the confidence goes down. And if you know, if obviously then there's like the physiological response, if the birth didn't go the way we wanted, then the oxytocin isn't flowing, and then the milk isn't flowing, and so then it kind of, yeah, you know, it's quite hard for mums, like, you know, it really is. It's and then babies are little Stone Age creatures. I mean, when they're born, they're not born into the world we think they're, you know, they're not born into the
that's a
world
really
we're
interesting
living in.
point.
They're not born into the world we're living in. They're born into this world where they're complete primal little creatures that still need us as much as they did when they were like in utero, at least for the first 3 to 6 months. I would say 6 months, you know. They don't think about, oh, that's a really nice fancy bassinet you bought for me, or they just think, oh, I don't feel right, I'm in this bassinet, I'm terrified, and I need to be back in arms, I need to be held. That's where I feel right.
Yeah. And so can you speak to us about the differences in terms of, so to get back to the breastfeeding thing, have each of your kids had a similar term of breastfeeding? And have you seen similarities or differences from one to the next in terms of your experience with them or their experience of it?
So when Freya was about 3.5, I got sick and I ended up in hospital. And it was kind of like our first big kind of separation. And so I couldn't feed her no longer. So she had an abrupt weaning. And that was really sad. It was sad for her, and it was sad for me, because those choices were taken away from us. But I was really sick. I was in intensive care. I had perforated ulcer. It just kind of came on all of a sudden, and yeah, it was really like, yeah. So I was like in hospital for about a week, and when I came back out, she didn't really ask for it anymore, and I was so I was down to like 7.5 stone, like, so like the milk was gone. There was no kind of like, when I'm talking about it now, I'm thinking back, like, I didn't think about, do I need to express? There was none of that. Like,
It's just gone.
you know, it was just gone. Like, my body was gone. The shock of the whole thing. And for her, like, she used to get, like, we would have still been attending La Leche League meetings, because by then I was a leader applicant, and on my own journey to becoming a leader. And you know, she was five, like, you know, she would say she felt sad when we'd be doing, you know, if you've ever been to a La Leche League meeting, Lydia, you know, we'd do an introduction and you talk about, you know, your breastfeeding journey. And she said she used to feel sad when she heard me say that, you know, we had to wean at that age, and it was, you know, it wasn't a choice. And then a couple of years later, it was like she was kind of holding on to that sadness, and it did affect her. And then she talked to her homeopath about it, and it really helped her release it. But she did feel it, like, because it was just so abrupt, and it was taken.
Yeah, the suddenness, of course.
Yeah. So then when Xavier came along, I remember she said to me, at the time she was 9, she goes, "You're not breastfeeding him longer than me."
That's hilarious.
Oh, well, he kind of exceeded it. He had his last feed on his 6th birthday, so I did.
Okay.
I did, and I pretty much did the same things again, and they worked really well for me. He he was 6 when he weaned, and his sister came along in the middle of that when he was 3 and 3 months, I think. Yeah.
Mm.
And so then I was tandem feeding them for 3 years. And that was
And
another.
that must have been tough, was it?
Oh, it wasn't. It was.
Did you still keep going out to music venues and concerts at that point? Come on. No way.
Yeah, but I moved on from that phase of my life.
I,
So like, well, I'm not really. Yeah, it was different. So like, because there was 9 years between him and Freya, he felt like a first baby again. So I was doing a lot of those really kind of easygoing things, bringing him here and there, and she would have been in school, and I would have been going to meetings, and so we still had that lovely kind of village of people around us.
Nice.
And like when I had Xavier, as I was saying earlier, I chose to have him because I went for donor conception. I decided I wanted to have another baby, so I went ahead and did that. And I did the same things again. I had my midwife, same midwife, and I made sure I had my village created and made sure people were bringing me food and supporting me all through that. And I don't know, I just went with the flow again. Breastfeeding him seemed like the best thing, and actually, what was really important for me as well is that around 18 months, the immunities in breast milk go back up as your child goes out more into the world, into, they might start play school at around 2. So like those immunities and antibodies and protective factors and all of that, and the security element, it's all still there. So that was another factor actually, that when I was breastfeeding Freya as well, I knew about that, and I just really saw that as such a fantastic support as well to me as a single mom. Like, I don't want to be going to doctors and all of that, and we hardly ever did go to the doctor. She's always really healthy, and they've all been really healthy, but that was another factor as well for me. And the play school they went to is the play school I used to work in, and I would have also breastfed them as a protective way of keeping them healthy at play school. So those were some of the big decisions as well, I guess, I made around extended breastfeeding.
Can you speak just a little bit about the rhythms in the day if you're like tandem feeding, and like what's their food and diet like, and is it just added to with breast milk? Is some of it replaced? Like how does that go in terms of diet and like keeping them fed and making sure you've got enough time for yourself? Because obviously you're conscious as a human that you as a single mum only have so much of a resource of energy for all these things, for breastfeeding, for being a mum there, for being there emotionally, physically doing all the work. Yeah. How do you manage those things, and how do you then support them food wise? And like, can you speak just a little bit about that aspect?
Oh yeah. Xavier was a great eater. He started eating at 6 months, and like, I mean, after like about 6 months, when babies start to wean onto solid foods, breast milk is still like 50% of their diet still, like, and for some it's 100% and 80%, depends on the child and their needs and what's going on for them. But no, he would have always enjoyed his food, so he would have like fed in the morning. Like, I mean, up to about 3, he would have fed like a lot. Like, he would have fed frequently. I couldn't tell you how many times a day he fed, but I couldn't tell you any, like, even when they were babies, how often they fed, like, because I just fed them. I didn't kind of think into it and think, oh, you just fed it half an hour ago, I'm not feeding you again, or oh, you shouldn't be hungry. I just fed them because it just made the most sense, like, just to respond to them, because they're looking. So
yeah, it's not about breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's like
yeah. And if they're looking, like, that's the thing about breastfeeding, it's not just nutrition. It's like Jack Newman says, it's like 10% nutrition for that's how children see it. It's about co-regulating as well, like, because when they're feeding, they're calm, they're relaxed. So it's about co-regulating. It helps them calm down if they fall. It helps them when they come back to you, they want to reconnect, they'll feed. So it's all those parts as well, like the nutrition part is a bonus.
Interesting.
Because when you're and if you're not feeding, I suppose if you're not extended breastfeeding, there's, your child is out of your arms a lot more. But when you do continue that relationship beyond 18 months and beyond, up to 2-3 years, your child is in your arms a lot. So, they're co-regulating in your arms, they're coming to you a lot more, they want to sit on your lap a lot more, they're getting all that like lovely sensory input as well, like and that's still growing them, and they're still having growth spurts. I think that's the other thing people forget about, like children have growth spurts, my God, up till they're 21, really. Like, it's like they're sitting there 21-year-old in my lap. But you know what I mean? When they're small, their little bodies are still going through so much, they're still processing so much, they're teething, they're growing, they're like their social interactions can overwhelm them, and breastfeeding can, bring that down for them. When they're away from you, they come back, they reconnect. I was saying that.
I think it's interesting because I remember feeling with Reuben, because he had tongue tie and his latch wasn't as good, he would latch on very, very forcefully, but like superficially, right? So it was really, I had really strong vasospasm because of it. But his feeds would be like an hour long. It wasn't like 10 minutes or 15 minutes like I would see with my friends. It was like an hour each time. And by the end of the hour, it was so sore, like for me, it was so sore that I just couldn't wait for that feed to be over. And then it would be like, oh God, when's another one coming, And so I think I hear that from a lot of women, that they're just so touched out by the end of it, and maybe really sore, that you have this feeling of out of controlness and touched outness. And then you try to find some control by implementing routine, by going, well, they should only feed, and you look at the books and they say, well, actually they only feed every 3 hours. And you're like, okay, right. So I'm just not going to feed them again for the next 3 hours, because that gives me a bit of a break and I get some space again. And, it's really hard then when you're having those feelings to do what you're saying, because I remember reading all about it and having the same thing, and growing up in India and Nepal and seeing women carry their babies all the time in Africa and they never put them down. And it's like, cool, I had all the slings, I was like, I'm carrying them all the time, that's what's going to happen. And then the reality of it was really, really different for me. It wasn't the way that I had imagined it was going to be, and it was really hard. And he actually wasn't a baby who wanted to be held. He was like, get away, I want to be on the ground. And everything that I had thought that I was going to do just didn't work. It wasn't right. And I didn't have anyone giving me the alternatives other than people saying, well, that's because you need to put them on a schedule of once every 4 hours, and that's how they should be feeding, and you shouldn't touch them too much, and you should create the space. And then as soon as that little gap of insecurity in your parenting choices, but also the feeling of overwhelm and being like, I actually need a break, comes in, that's when you start to fall into like, well, I will do the routine and I will do those things. And, and so it's interesting because I'm listening to you talking and I'm like, yeah, and all of that makes sense to me. And it was all what I wanted to do. But my reality of actually trying to do it just didn't go that way. And I think had I grown, was I living in a tribe somewhere and there was all these different women around me showing me all the ways to do, or showing me what to do, instead of me trying to call lactation consultants and they were too busy to see me for another 10 days. And, you're going to these weighing things and they're telling you your baby's losing weight, and you have the voices in your ear saying, well, maybe they're starving, maybe you might be starving your baby. Of course, then it's very hard. I don't know, I didn't find that support system. And certainly the breastfeeding meetings that I went to, everyone was just sitting having a great time breastfeeding their babies. And I was the one with this baby was like hitting me and scratching at me and screaming the whole time and refusing to latch on. And I didn't feel that support from those people. And I wasn't getting it over the phone or from people around me. And I guess I would say I think there's probably a lot of mums like me, or mums coming into it, who weren't even as secure as me going into it. And then how are they meant to thrive in that situation? Because it doesn't feel natural and it doesn't feel easy,
Yeah. It's very difficult, especially, because I suppose I'm talking about quite, for me, very normal breastfeeding journeys. You're talking about your breastfeeding journey was challenging, because Reuben had tongue tie and you didn't get the support you needed, and and no, you didn't know where to go, or or maybe how to ask, or I suppose, and it's about being vulnerable as well, about being able to ask for that support. And I hate saying try to find your tribe, like, but in a way it is like, but I suppose this was my experience. Like, it's not going to be everybody's experience. I don't know. Was it because of the home births and just the ease of that that helped? None of my kids had tongue tie, or like I remember reading about in the continuum concept and thinking, all right, this will keep everything away. Because they talked about the fact that none of the babies had colic, or I don't think they used the word reflux back then. The book was written in like 1975, but it was colic. They would have said colic because the babies just felt right. They didn't have to struggle or stress, or they didn't have rashes or eczema, and I was like, okay, that sounds like a good plan. But I think it's about going to breastfeeding support before you have your baby as well, and I think sometimes people don't know that, like, groups like La Leche League are open to having breastfeeding mothers, or not breastfeeding, pregnant mothers come along, and they completely are. Like, I mean, that's when they want you to come along, and Pridgey groups and Friends of Breastfeeding, they want you all to connect before the baby's born. Like, but I think people get so much into the birth that they're kind of like, oh yeah, this is how I'll feed the baby, but then, oh yeah, but the birth is a big thing. If we just get through the birth, then we can move on to the next bit. But as I said at the start, they're a continuum. The pregnancy, the birth, and the breastfeeding, they're all, they're kind of like the Trinity.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, I knew that it was a good idea to go to the breastfeeding meetings while I was pregnant. I knew that, but like, I was so busy just trying to get into the zone of the home birth and trying to stay really present and doing my yoga and my meditation. It felt like exactly that. I was like, yeah, but it's going to be, I was like, I'm going to breastfeed, so I'll go to those meetings and I'll breastfeed, and that'll be it. And I think you're right. Had I gone to those meetings and I'd met the people first, and I felt like I had a rapport with them already, and I kind of knew them when I was in my comfortable space, it would have been a lot easier for me to go back there when I was really challenged. But when you're going somewhere new for the first time and you're challenged, it's double vulnerable making, for sure.
Yeah, because it's completely overwhelming. Like, I mean, when you turn up to a meeting for the first time and you're trying to get out the door, and you're trying to get the baby out the door, and then you're trying to get the baby out of the car and into the buggy system and the whole thing, like, and then open that door and all these faces turn around, and they're all welcoming and they're happy to see you, like, but it must be overwhelming, like, for mums. And if you go beforehand, you have the number of a leader that you might have connected with, or could you breastfeeding counselor, that you've connected with on the day, like, and had a nice chat with, that you can then go, oh, I'll just send her a text and ask her what she thinks of this, and do I need more support, or should I talk to an IBCLC, or and then they can kind of guide you as well. But I just think sometimes women will ring me, like, because I still volunteer with La Leche League, and they go, is it okay to bring the baby? Like, of course it is. But sometimes people hear the word meeting or something and they think it's formal, or that it's something that's formal, or they think, when is the class on? And I'm like, oh no, it's not a class, it's informal. We just all sit around and have
it's just a chat. It's like a circle. It's a woman's circle.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it is a women's circle. And I guess I had that as well outside of La Leche League with mum friends, where we used to do potlucks and bring the babies. And it's kind of society as well, making it more easier for parents to bring their babies with them. Like, I mean, if you look at other countries like Spain and Italy, and they have babies and children with them all the time in restaurants, and on the streets, and the streets are safe for them, and and I'm not sure what their extended breastfeeding culture would be like, but it definitely would support it. And I mean, I remember going on holidays with Freya, like, and breastfeeding everywhere. I never even thought about not breastfeeding anywhere. Like,
so with all, like, the statistical validation of breastfeeding and even an extended breastfeeding as well. I mean, what is it, up until 2 years? There's like significant proportions, a lot of the micronutrients that are supplied from breast milk. there's disease risk reduction for the child, which is well established, disease risk reduction for the mother, which actually we were reading about before the podcast in terms of breast cancer, but lots of other diseases as well. There's so much there. So there's obviously still this kind of taboo element within Western culture, Irish society anyway, definitely. How have you seen changes in that, and how do you think we're overcoming it? Are we overcoming it? And if so, what sort of steps are we taking then to kind of like to erode that? I know like La Leche League is obviously a core part for you. I can hear that and it makes sense. But are there other kind of like tools and tactics from society, other than having these conversations in public, that can really improve the state of the situation?
Yeah, so I think that the politicians are starting to wake up. That was, that was another book I would have read very early on my journey as well, was Politics of Breastfeeding by Gabrielle Palmer. And that kind of made my blood boil when I read that. It also made me, really kind of activated the activist in me as well. Like, so I'm also involved with Baby Feeding Law Group Ireland. And I think we have seen an upsurge recently in politicians becoming a lot more interested in breastfeeding, and there's the breastfeeding strategy that needs to be implemented. It was meant to be implemented by 2021, but it's been extended for 2022. But again, what needs to underpin that is the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, because like without everybody being on board to support the mums in the early days, I mean, the politicians can bring in all the policies and procedures and say, and they can bring in the code of, it was the 40th anniversary of the code there 2 weeks ago of breast milk substitutes, the marketing of breast milk substitutes.
Oh,
yeah,
very
so there was lots of coverage. Baby Feeding Law Group Ireland did a whole campaign around that with UNICEF Ireland, so UNICEF Ireland coming on board as well. And there's a lot more politicians talking out. Roisin Shortall, Jennifer Whitmore, they're all kind of getting behind it. But we also need to, have that baby-friendly hospital policy where, skin to skin is normal, not offering formula when the mum hits a challenge, looking for the breastfeeding answer, finding the breast solution to that problem. The answer is in formula, especially if the mother wants to breastfeed. I mean, the initiation rate is like 63%, roughly. And I think it's like half of that by the time they leave the hospital. So what's happening in those 3 days?
Whoa.
Initiation rate drops then, like.
Because I was going to say 63% isn't terrible. I mean, that's not as bad as I expected, but it's down to less than half by the time they're gone out of hospital. Okay.
Yeah, and then it's down to 6% by 6 months. That was the latest finding.
6%?
Yeah.
That's very low. Wow, interesting. That's surprising for me.
Yeah, so like, and the WHO recommend 6 months and then following on up to 2 years. So that's like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because looking at the statistics, in the UNICEF 2012 report, I think it said, in different countries around the world, they were checking to see what percentage of mums were still breastfeeding their babies at 20 to 23 months. And like Bangladesh, it was 91%, Nepal was 95%, Rwanda 84%, Malawi 77%. And yet there was no statistics or information about how many were still feeding in England, Ireland, America, Australia, New Zealand. And I think certainly I remember when I was talking, like when I was doing studying about this stuff, when I was doing pregnancy training, and I was talking to my friends about extended breastfeeding. And it was the first time that I had heard the notion. I knew that in Nepal, I'd seen people breastfeed their babies at 2 or 3. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about the age, but it was normal. But I hadn't really thought about it since then. And then when the concept was introduced to me, and I would have been like 26 or something, I was thinking, oh, feed a baby at like 5 or 6. Like, how would that be? It was really strange. And when I read about it, it said like, there's so many interesting statistics. Kelly Mum was talking about the breast milk, what breast milk contains for a baby of 12 to 23 months. So she was saying in 448 mils, 94% of the B12 amount that a baby needs is there, 60% of vitamin C, 75% of vitamin A, 43% of their protein needs. And the WHO said that just a modest increase in breastfeeding could prevent up to 10% of deaths in children under 5. I mean, those statistics they're staggering. I mean, they speak for themselves. But I remember when I was telling things like that to people, the overwhelming response I was met with was ultimately revulsion. Like people were like, ugh, that's so wrong. Like, why would you feed it? And especially if it was a mum feeding a boy, they were going like, oh, feeding a boy baby. I mean, I think there's like some kind of a notion that there's a weird sexual thing that's like wrong, especially if you're feeding a boy, that you're somehow sexualizing them, or that it's sexual for the mom, or some kind of a thing. And that notion it's still so prevalent, because even just for a mom who's breastfeeding a small baby out and about, you still get like a lot of people giving you dirty looks or saying horrible comments to you, and that's with a little baby. So then the idea that we accept that like a toddler would walk up to the mom, or like a 5-year-old would walk up to the mom and feed, people are just like, whoa. I think that, like, how do we normalize that? How do we, like, it has to be like, you need to see it on more TV shows, we need to see it on movies, we need to have like loads of these conversations that we're having, but just need to be had like all the time, and all the women who are feeding those babies need to be like talking about it and showing themselves and going like, here, I'm a normal person, I'm not doing something weird and perverted, I'm doing what I feel is best and what like the statistics say is best.
And the other really interesting thing about like when you're feeding an older child, like the immunities are so much stronger because they're so much more concentrated in the milk as well. Like kind of mind-blowing in a way, like, you know, because it makes sense. Like it's kind of like, it's like what our bodies were meant to do in a way, like you know, the Cassie Detweller, I don't know if you came across her in your studies, but she wrote a lot about and looked at natural term nursing, and she kind of looked at primates, she looked at chimpanzees, and then she kind of correlated it with humans, with the eruption of teeth, and kind of came to the conclusion that between 2.5 to 7 years is that window where children will wean, and they will wean naturally as well. So I know a lot of friends whose children have weaned between 6 and 7. So that would be kind of, and across different parts of the world as well, like where you mentioned, those would be kind of similar age groups, if you came across that, Lydia. How do we normalize it? Well, yeah, that's a bit tricky, but I suppose as well, children will naturally create their own boundaries, and we will kind of create boundaries as well, like, and I guess society puts those boundaries on us as well. But like my youngest is she's 6, she's nearly 6.5 actually, and she still feeds, and she loves feeding. She'll feed in the morning, and she'll feed to sleep at night, and she'll feed when she comes in from school. But she wouldn't dream of asking me when she comes out of school to sit down on the ground and feed her, because she's put that boundary on herself.
Within the rhythm of her day, even, like, she kind of becomes a little adult while she's by being in school, societally kind of whatever affected or influenced, and then by the morning time that's all evaporated, or nighttime.
Yeah, but she knows, she's very clear when she asks to feed. She'll ask me to sit down. She'll say, can I have milk? She calls breast milk best milk. She's like trying to sell me on it, like, keep feeding me, mom. But she's like to us it's normal. It's part of our family. Like my 18-year-old doesn't bat an eyelid. She has a boyfriend now. He doesn't bat an eyelid either anymore. Right. So I think, you know, I'm hopefully educating the next part of the generation. And I suppose that's it as well. Like, I think, you know, like all parts of reproduction should be discussed in school, and natural term breastfeeding should be talked about in school. You know, hormones and pregnancy, and, you know, it should be kind of gone into a little bit more deeper, like more kind of culturally, maybe even as well, like, and then of course in the realm of women's health overall, the overall picture of women's health. Like, I mean, it's like for every 12 months you've breastfed, it's like 4.3% it lowers the risk of breast cancer. Like, I mean, so, and that's like over an extended period of time. So however long you've breastfed, all that together, and you know, that's huge.
Yeah.
So sorry, I lost my train of thought now.
No,
No, yeah, you're absolutely answered the question in terms of
Yeah.
how we start to transition. You're right. It's the templating. It's the demonstrable, image of women breastfeeding around other people, around their kids, boyfriends, right? All that sort of stuff. Just the normalization. I think, I think you make it sound so normal that it doesn't sound like a job of work to do when we're talking to you. But then when we stop this podcast, we go back out into the world, we go, oh yeah, no, we still that still has to be solved.
Yeah, and I think you're dead right. It's education at the earliest stages. I mean, we just did a podcast this week on our ideas for an alternative sexual health program in schools compared to the template that's there now, and blue sky thinking about what we would like to see discussed and how it might look, and this is part of that though, isn't it? It's education in terms of like, if when you went to your doctor's surgery there was a poster that showed you breastfeeding length of times around the world, and you were just sitting in the waiting room and you were like, oh, hang on, so in loads of countries they breastfeed till 2. Just even that being implanted in your head and being given validation by the doctor's surgery of like, hey, this is normal. Or if there was a statistics of like, this is what your breast milk contains at this age, or this is how much it reduces the risk of breast cancer. I mean, it says, we found one that said, the New York Times published a 2009 study that said women with an immediate relative that had breast cancer, like a sister or a mother, if they breastfed, there was a 59% lower risk of premenopausal breast cancer. So I mean, that's a really significant reason that doctors and midwives and breastfeeding educators would be telling people like, yes, it's brilliant for your baby, but nature does its thing, right? And it's naturally there. If it's better for your baby, it's going to be better for you and society and illness, and all those things. And so the more we see those posters, and like, it's up to us as well to do more posts on Instagram about this stuff, and people like you to try and spread that information, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all about the kind of, go on, sorry.
I know, I'm just thinking stats, you're talking about stats there, and I suppose looking at how we could collect stats in Ireland of how many mums are breastfeeding there, like if you look at Extended Breastfeeding Ireland Facebook group, like, I mean, there's over, God, I can't remember how many, people are on that, but there's like over 200,000. I'm not sure actually, but there's a large number, because I like that group was started by a Cork mum, and I remember being like number 10 on that group 10 years ago. 10 years ago, yeah, and we all had like little babies, and they're all going to be 10-year-olds in January. That when it would have started, January 2012 it started, and in January 2022 we'll all have 10-year-olds. But it's like about valuing it as part of breastfeeding, because like even doctors don't value it. If you go into hospital and you have an 18-month-old, they're like, oh well, you just have to wean. It's just like, you wean, just wean, and they don't think about your breast health. They don't think about the social and emotional side or the emotional side for the child. They're just like, just wean, like, simple, just do that. We need to, we need to have stats, and I don't know how we collect them. Maybe in the, what's that? I can't think of the name of it. Where they collect
census.
Yes, yeah. If there was a question on breastfeeding and that.
Yeah, exactly. We should talk to Holly Cairns about it.
Truth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely it. It's finding out the statistics, seeing what the terrain actually looks like, and knowing what's happening in the houses, what's happening with people, like what is actually going on, and seeing that is a normal thing. And also, like you said, and we just touched on it there for a second, but I think just like in sexuality, and we talked about this with Sarah Sproul in the sexuality podcast, people have a misconception that the more you talk to your kids about sex, the more promiscuous they're going to be, which absolutely does not bear out in the statistics. It shows you that they're more safe, that they're more well informed, they have better boundaries around consent, that kind of stuff. And this is the same thing. People have an idea that if you're extended breastfeeding, you're somehow creating codependency and children that are not independent. And the absolute opposite bears out in the statistics, which is you have much more independence and much more security within that independence in those children, because they've had all their needs securely met at home. And that's the information that people need to understand, that it's not like a weird thing where mums are like, I must keep my babies close because I can't let go. Like no one's at 5 years old going, I really need this child, my 5-year-old, to be on me. Like no one's thinking that.
No.
They're just going like, this, I can see the benefits to my child, to their emotional health and their physical health. And these are part of the same choices as we make when we give our kid a smoothie in the morning. It's just the same.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, when you talk about the independence, like my 6.5-year-old now is just in the last month said to me as we're going into school, I can go by myself now. And she's kind of pushing me back a little bit further. I didn't say, do you want to go by yourself? She just said to me one morning, like, so, I can see that independence growing in her all the time, like.
And it's usually, I mean, we know it from most of our relationships. The more you push somebody away, the more needy and clingy they become. Like that's a human instinct in adults as it is in kids. So it makes sense to like not resist and then allow it to progress in its own way, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's what I was saying about the surrender part. When your baby is clingy, the worst thing to try and do is to try and stop them being clingy or try to get away from them. But it's better to hold them closer. Together, it'll regulate you, it'll regulate the baby.
Amazing.
Maria, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I think we could probably go on talking to you for a really, really long time, but we shouldn't keep you any longer. But if people want to find you, if they're interested in you as a lactation consultant, in your story, and I think something we didn't touch on at all, which we were planning to touch on, but there was so much to talk about, was your journey to choosing to be a single mum through donor conception. And I think that that's a fascinating topic that lots of mums, I'm sure, are interested in, because I've got a lot of friends myself who are my age and going, well, hang on, maybe actually that is something I'd look into. Where can they find you? Do you have a social media page, Instagram, website, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Breastfeeding Journeys Cork, and I'm also on Instagram, Breastfeeding Journeys Cork, I think it is. And I have a website as well, breastfeedingcork.ie.
Okay.
And I think that's it.
Yeah.
Great. Listen, we'll put those into the notes. But thank you so much. You're an amazing resource, and you're a really great example, I think, of like really instinctive and really safe parenting. Really genuine, authentic, honest human parenting. So fair dues to you, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
that's so nice. Thank you.
Nice one, Debbie. Take care. So enough. The last things to say. Just thank you to our sponsors. And UNICEF Nutrition, our nutrition partners who produce a great shake for kids good stuff, which we really genuinely love. Liv uses it with her kid, my sister uses it with theirs, and we have a lot of it obviously through the Hop Sec. We recommend a lot. It's a really good whole food nutrition to add to their diets. We have Clear Light saunas as well. For those of you who are ready to put a little hot box in your garden, come and talk to us because we can get you discounts. And maybe you don't want to go back to gym saunas, which probably won't be open for some time anyway. And also to Swivel, to our partners who we record this on this little device. So thank you to them, and thank you more to Maria. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting, enlightening chat.
Thanks, and we'll see you all again soon.
Bye.
Bye.